because they don't prioritize it.
Yeah, the part that drives me crazy is that they stop, like you'll turn one thing on and then instead of disappearing all that stuff, it'll basically just say, oh, no, you can't turn that on because this is there and there isn't even a link to it.
Well, I don't think anybody intentionally wants to design bad user experiences, bad software. So I'm just wondering if it's maybe, I don't know if they look at user feedback, or maybe if they do, maybe it's just hubris. Maybe they just think, well, you know, if you don't know how to use it, maybe you should just figure it out, kind of like this arrogance.
I don't think they're trying to design bad. I don't think they care.
It is complete and crash check.
Affirmative. With Sony's regard, by the way, the answer is going to be accessibility. So accessibility is going to change all the UX, all the design, all the software end, and I think that's how it gets fixed.
Yeah, I'm very curious with the new web-based interface on these Sony cameras that they have now, whether or not that would be easier to use from an accessibility perspective. I would assume it would have to, right?
Yeah, well, they're implementing a screen reader soon enough, or pushing it through firmware probably, that's going to offer it to all the other cameras. So that's going to change the trajectory of how people use it and move through menus. So how do you get through one menu to another? So that logic of UX design is going to come in there to make it universal design. So I think that's how it's going to get fixed. All of these products, if you look at Apple, blah, 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 they all get fixed by accessibility.
Or AI, with the ability to talk to the device.
True. But the AI is giving someone access to information that way, so still accessibility.
Still feels silly talking to a computer. I don't know if I'll ever get used to that. It's like that, you know, in Star Trek, The Voyage Home, hello, computer.
Computer.
You're supposed to use the mouse. Oh, how quaint.
Will it help if Apple gets this rest of this archive your voice in our cloud thing and you end up talking to yourself, literally?
You won't be lonely.
You'll finally be able to say, I had an argument with myself and lost, and be technically correct.
That's right. See?
Yeah, I will say that not having an app is a problem. Well, not having a touchscreen, like, because you know I'm sure they save a lot of money on that not having a touchscreen. But wow, is it a pain in the neck? Like when you spent 3 years using a touchscreen with a Blackmagic camera, and or the last 5 years have been Blackmagic cameras where I can just touch on what I want to change and then I just change it. And now I'm like, and then the way that they built the interface doesn't make any sense. You know, like there's like 80 buttons.
There's no web interface for that. It's just for the FR7.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Remember, it's still not a GoPro.
It's not a GoPro. Still. I will admit that it got to a point with the GoPro where I would just know up, down, over, up, down, over. And I would just do it really fast. And then I understood that sports people, that's what they did.
Yeah.
You know? So that's
what you do to turn on the red recording light.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. All right. Then bye. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and digital production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about Cine Gear. We are going to be covering it, and we're going to talk about ideas, brainstorming based on what we saw at NAB, on what we have to work with, those kinds of things. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what we're planning for the coverage, get your feedback. So if you've got ideas for Cine Gear or questions about the coverage, go ahead and throw those into Mukana. And otherwise, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Tony Mobley this morning. He's from Noonan, Georgia, and says, have any of the panelists tested live performance audio in Zoom meetings audio settings?
So I think this just came out in the last update. And for some reason, the update's not working on my laptop. It just goes, I would like to update. And it goes, I can't. I can't do that right now. So I don't know exactly what's going on there. So we'll wait until I get back. But I believe that the live performance audio obviously will be a higher quality audio, maybe even over original. So we'll see how that goes as we move forward. But I think it just came out. The updates, I think, ran out yesterday. I got it after the show. We tried to answer it before the show, but we hadn't seen any updates yet. So the update is now went out to everyone, and we're going to hopefully be able to take a look at it. So definitely ask that question next week. I plan to get the new Zoom update when I get home. I'm going to figure out, I don't know why my laptop won't install it, but I know my studio will. We'll get that installed. We'll get it updated, and we'll start to play with it and see what happens. Next question.
Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm looking for a budget home theater projector. What would you choose between the BenQ 2050A DLP versus the Epson Home Cinema 2250 3LCD?
Go ahead, Nigel.
I think they're pretty close, almost exactly the same specs. I think you'll find the Epson has a slightly better contrast ratio. The BenQ is slightly cheaper and better if gaming is important because its refresh rate is better. But if you can sneak up to the 2350, you'll get 4K.
There we go. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, kind of maybe Nigel knows more about this because it's been a while since I bought projectors. The different technology, DLP versus 3LCD. If you're going to be shooting it with a camera, you may run into problems if they're still using color wheels on the DLP projectors that are rotating very fast. So you can have some artifacts there. And generally, I found the DLPs to have a little better contrast ratio.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Samuel Nordvik in Norway. When using DHCP reservation on a network that requires fixed IPs, how do you handle redundancy if your router should go down?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I always try to make sure my router doesn't go down. So usually I have a UPS on the router itself if it's doing addressing at all. For the most part, with routers, once a device gets on the network and the number is given, if the router does go down and that's not your primary communications hub, then the device will stay on the IP address until it comes and sees another DHCP router. So don't make sure you don't have more than one router on there, of course. But then if you need to add anything from there, the only way to do that is to have a static IP on the other device.
I go, Jason.
Yeah, once you lock it in on the router, then you should just lock it in on the device. The other way to do it, of course, is with a managed switch.
Yeah, the advantage, of course, of setting all your manual, just setting it to manual and having your IPs manual is that you don't have to worry about that because everything's going to maintain its IP numbers. The disadvantage of that is it's very, you can really spend a lot of time DXing that if you don't really keep track of it. If you have to make sure that you know where everything is and how it's working. Whereas with a router, you can define all of those things. We often define them on the MAC addresses. So we just say, this is the MAC address. And that MAC address always gets this IP, and that has made it a lot easier. Setting up all those reservations takes a lot of time in the beginning, but then you plug everything in and it just does what it needs to do. But you do get into the situation you're talking about here. As Jeffrey said, usually those reservations last. I think the standard is usually 24 hours, and so unless you're right when it was supposed to update those, you should be okay. Next question.
Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York says, morning, everyone. What workflow and hardware would the panel recommend in order to display a multi-view on a 55-inch monitor when using the Thunderbolt ports as extended display outs on a Mac Studio?
I go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out exactly what you're trying to do. So it sounds like you want to do 4 different monitors on one big monitor. Basically, that's where a matrix comes in. And then, of course, we were using these for the Zoom ISO when it first came out. These are the pluggable HDMI. They have a DisplayPort and an HDMI, and these are the headless HDMIs, so we could get the actual 4 screens going through there. And that's where I would do that, plug these into the 2 Thunderbolt ports. But the other cool thing about that is, since the Mac Mini is Thunderbolt 4, you can get a dock into these two, bring the 4 monitors into your matrix, which would then go into the monitor.
There you go, Bill.
And do a little bit of testing. I have noticed just recently, in the past couple of months, there must have been an update in my system files. And if I only have one of my Thunderbolt external monitor connected and I boot up in the morning, it goes into one mode. If I have the second one attached, it goes into my office hours mode, which is completely different, including the HDMI output on it. So there is something very intelligent working in the background that is looking at what devices are connected to which ports, and it will configure the system to display that configuration depending on what it sees on the ports. I find that very useful because I don't have to mess with my windows anywhere near as much as I used to. But that may mean that if you're doing something like I think you're talking about, driving a quad display, that it seeing that may or may not act like you're expecting. So I just test a little bit beforehand to make sure that it's going to work the mode that you want it to.
Next question.
TJ Asher, Minneapolis, says, every time iPad OS updates, it keeps putting widgets on my home screen. I don't want them and remove them each time. Anybody else experience this or have any ideas how to prevent these from reappearing again each time?
Go, Jason.
I've never experienced this, but my guess is that you either have a Focus that has widgets associated with it, or your iPad has multiple main display desktops that are somehow associated. But other than that, I don't know.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York. How many of you have jumped ship from Adobe to DaVinci Resolve? With the 18.5 release, it seems like it's the cool thing to do. Is it good enough to give up my Creative Cloud subscription?
Go, John.
I don't think cool is the right adjective here. I used Adobe for decades, and it just kept crashing on me and crashing. And so I moved to Resolve for that specific reason about 2 years ago, and super happy. But I still can't give up CC because I use every other application in CC. So I use them all.
Yeah, go, Nigel.
Yeah, I think what John said is at the core of the answer to this question is how much of CC do you use? Are you an After Effects? What is your use of the Adobe product set? Personally, as a Mac user, I jumped from Premiere, which is what I learned to edit on, to Final Cut Pro because Adobe were having their little moment with Apple and didn't want to play nice. All my Windows using colleagues are still on Premiere, but they are also on Premiere because they're using the rest of the suite. And I think that's really the consideration. If you're paying for CC just for Premiere, you may want to think about Resolve. I do think, though, in a few days we get Final Cut Pro and on the iPad, and I do think that's going to be the moment of pause where we rethink about everything in that context.
Go, Jeffrey.
And then sometimes the software is just like antivirus. One day this antivirus works because it's protecting this bug, and then the new bug shows up, and then the next day this antivirus starts to work a lot better because it's a back and forth thing. I would. The first thing I would check is make sure that your plugins are going to be compatible. The plugins that you need for whatever workflow you're doing with DaVinci Resolve before you make the jump. Because if there's one thing that you cannot live without, then making the jump is pretty pointless. However, usually I find that a lot of the stuff that I use is cross-platform, so it'll go from Final Cut to Premiere to Resolve easily.
Yeah, I admit I haven't used Premiere for a long time, but I have I used Final Cut 100% of the time for probably a solid 20 years. Now it's about 50-50 with Resolve. I'm not going over to Resolve. It's just 50-50. I do fast edits on Final Cut. I do precision edits and color and everything else in Resolve, and I don't see any reason for me to go any further than that. What I don't really understand, to be honest, where Premiere fits into that model, unless you're already using it and using all the other products that are there, because the subscription model by itself is just not a great deal when you can get Resolve and all those updates are free and you pay $300 once or even get into it for free. Same thing with Final Cut. I just don't understand the model anymore. Like, I think that Premiere has what it has. I think it's going to have an increasingly hard time keeping up, because the rumor is that Resolve has about 3 times the number of engineers working on it than Premiere. So you're going to keep on seeing the keeping up with the Joneses is going to continue to get harder and harder. And the tools, the integration of those tools is profound. Like, being able to have something where I'm not going round trip to After Effects. I'm saying, oh, I want to take this and do an effect on it, and I'm just going to go into the Fusion tab. I want to do some audio, and I just go into the Fairlight tab. I want to do, all of those things are all in one place. It's really hard to compete with that. Having the best color page that anybody has in one tab that's sitting there already there. I think it's very hard to compete with. The only thing that Resolve can't do is compete with the speed that I can do things in Final Cut. And it's not because I know it. It's because I will argue objectively the interface is built to cut things quickly. And it's just much more fluid to put something together really fast. And so I don't see myself ever changing those. I do think I see a lot of people that are not in Hollywood necessarily moving to Resolve. So influencers and other folks are moving more and more towards Resolve or Final Cut, but mostly Resolve. Hollywood has its own thing. There's pipelines built. There's things. There's infrastructure. Avid has probably, feels like they have 60 to 80% of the market. Premiere has most of the remainder of that for the smaller productions. And then there's a handful of people using Final Cut and Resolve as far as edits for those things. But I think Resolve keeps on wrapping up. The one that's really growing in Hollywood is Resolve in that process. But I think that it's going to be really exciting to see what happens next week with Final Cut. I think Apple's going to be pushing that. So, but I think I think Avid has what it has. Resolve and Apple are kind of in a head-to-head. And Premiere, I just don't understand where it fits anymore. Next question.
Vincent Alvarez, Bellingham, Washington's up next. What is the simplest setup for a non-techie to connect a Shure MV7 using the XLR to a PC? Thinking of a backup in case the USB doesn't have enough oomph to get a good level and for use during Zoom meetings.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, I think a single channel audio interface is pretty simple. They're pretty easy to use. I recommend the Audient ID4. It is a single channel mic preamp audio interface with USB-C. It has solid build quality. They're British companies. Their preamps are really high end and they sound great. It's got a multi-segment LED meter on it. So that is a good one to go with. If you want to spend a little bit more, for $300 US, you can get a Lewitt Connect 6, which has 70, I think it's 72 or 76 dB of gain on their mic preamps. You get 2 mic preamps with that. The nice thing about the Lewitt is the Mixer app has a loopback setting, so you can route audio to your live stream. You can do custom headphone mixes. You can create custom mixes for all the outputs, which is awesome. And it has DSP as well, so you get your compression, you get your EQ, and you get a expander as well to lower the noise floor. So that's another option for you.
Lewitt seems to be a really interesting company. I have very little interaction with it, but it just seems like they're kind of very geeky, very like, we're going to make this thing work. They have a couple different mics that will look like a lot of, I think I want to say the 414. Is that correct? Or am I thinking?
I think it's they make, if we're talking about condenser, large diaphragm, the 440 is actually a very reasonably priced.
But isn't that the one that kind of changes, you can change modes for it in a lot of different ways?
Oh, I forget the model number. The more expensive ones, yes, they have. You can change the tone. Like if you want a FET microphone or you want a tube microphone, and do you want a bright sound? Do you want a dark sound?
And it sounded pretty good. I mean, I found them interesting. If I didn't already have a Stellar X2, I would probably think about it. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney. Speaking of Stellar X2s.
Stellar X. Use a Stellar X2 now. Yeah. I kind of concur with what was said by Alexander. The Audient Evo 4, is that what you were talking about? Or is there a different one you were talking about? It's about $129. Yeah, that's a different one. That's an entry-level one. That's kind of recommended because it's simplicity of the controls, and it's got about 65 dB of gains, which might be on the low end. For that MV7, it might get you up there enough. Depends on how much gain is in your PC and once it gets into the USB interface. But that's one. Other high recommendations, although I know a lot of people that hate them, are the Focusrite Scarlets. So you might look at that as well. But you're going to need a preamp interface that goes into USB in any case.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, just a quick thing on the Evo line. I actually forgot about that series because the Evo line is geared towards people that don't know how to gain stage correctly. So if you just press the button, it will listen to your voice, and it will automatically set the gain appropriately with enough headroom for your voice. And also the other interface, the Lewitt, does have that feature as well, which is pretty nice for novices.
Go, Harshid.
With the Evo, yes, it is simple. It's all ran through software. So all those controls and whatnot is basically a driver package. I had the Audient Evo 4. I ran to a limiting issue because of dB. The Vocaster from the Focusrite family is the one you want to go for if you want more gain. It has about 70 gain on the Vocaster. They're also dropped in price. And then SSL2. Any of them, SSL2 Plus, that's 62 dB of gain, and you're going to be able to get some clean sound out of it too.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Apple rolled out ChatGPT on iOS just now. What is the significance?
Go ahead, John.
They made this announcement at 10 a.m. yesterday, Paul, and shortly thereafter, I discorded you because I knew you were going to ask this question today. So the nice thing about them making an iOS app, if you go into the
and be clear, it's not that Apple rolled it out. It's just that OpenAI submitted ChatGPT, a ChatGPT app, which looks exactly like the web interface to
100%.
Yeah.
So if you go on there and search for GPT or OpenAI, you're going to find dozens and dozens of copycats that are gaining personal information from people. So it's super scary. Make sure you find the right one and be very careful of what you install on your phone. You're either going to spend money on it or they're going to steal your data.
And I think that it felt like OpenAI just had to put out its own app. It just had to get out there and get in front of this because there were so many people that were putting out such bad apps and dangerous apps. And the only way to protect themselves, I think, was to put this out. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. This isn't Apple. This is ChatGPT, OpenAI doing this. I actually use ChatGPT through a shortcut that I saw a video about, which is really a good way of doing it. So this isn't Apple doing AI, and we shouldn't be confused that this is Apple doing AI. We don't know what Apple's AI strategy is, and I don't think we will for what is a couple more weeks. But it seems to me the most interesting thing that's going to happen at WWC, other than the virtual reality, augmented reality glasses, is Apple talking about AI and where they're going to land. Because, in the current gold rush that is going on around AI, it's a mess strategically and everybody's going for land grabs. What nobody's really done outside of those of us who are more technical focused is work out where the early majority is going to be. This is all early adopter stuff. So someone's going to put a marker down for the early majority, which is where you really start to monetize this stuff. And it'll be fascinating to see whether Apple's ready to do that.
Go, Courtney. Can't hear you, Courtney.
Yeah.
All right. Some days the click works. Anyway, you guys pointed out the salient points that it's OpenAI. I have a ChatGPT on my phone and Android, so I'm not sure whether I can't bring it up right now, but I'm not sure whether it's an original app or whether it's just the web interfaced app for the mobile version of the web interfaced app. It's probably what's launching the browser to bring it up, but it does. I can use on my Samsung phone. I can use voice input on it, which is handy, and I'm not sure if the Apple supports voice input for the prompt.
It does. You can actually hit, so in the app, you can hit there's a little microphone that's just built into iOS. So you hit it and you can sit there and just say what you want to say into it and close it and hit go. So it's really doing the voice to text conversion. It's not anything special, but it works. I will say that it has vastly increased my use of ChatGPT instantly. Because before it was like, oh, I got to get on the web page, and now I did have the login for the web page, but it was just a little bit of a little, anyway, it was just, that was not as smooth. So I had to think about it. Now I have an app that I just pop open, and to the point that was made earlier, I'm going to get a shortcut set up now so that, to that app where I can just say something or do something really quickly and just immediately ask those questions. So I think that it's going to, I think that the app is going to make a big difference. John, you were showing that's it's just the regular text input, right? That's So anyway, I think it's pretty exciting. It does make it much more convenient where you're just asking questions and talking to it in a lot of ways. And I do think that, we're going to get to a point, and we have to figure out what that looks like, but I'm trying to get to a shortcut or some setup where I can just sit there and just ask, like I would do, hey, Shlomo, as Andy and Naka would say, hey, Shlomo, do, what is this, or explain this, or talk this, and have it immediately give it back to me in audio while I'm walking around or driving or whatever, without having to actually, interact with it at all. And so I think that but I don't think we're very far away. I mean, in 6 months, we're going to be kind of just talking to our phone. For better or worse, I think that that's probably the direction we're going. Next question.
Alexander Knight, Vancouver, British Columbia. Next question. Does Sony offer an API for their cameras so third parties can create their own ways to access the camera's settings?
Go, Jeffrey.
There is, but it's a slight caveat because it really depends on what kind of camera you have. For a DSLR, the ZV-E1, and they support the little handheld, the DSC models. They're like the little GoPro style cameras. And then there's a few others. So I'd say about 10, 12 models at the most right now.
None of the useful ones. For ones that are like geeky, as I think those are the P1s or whatever, the little square ones, that made sense. But like for the A7 series, the professional series, Sony has an API. They just don't make it available. This has been a problem. And this is why we moved. One of the big reasons that I moved to Blackmagic was being so frustrated with the way that Sony supported our ability to program into their hardware. And so I was really excited. And we do use up a lot of that in Blackmagic hardware and software. And so, but yeah, they haven't been very forthcoming in that. It's just culturally, they don't really make it widely available for the cameras that they consider kind of the professional cameras. They want to have a lot more control. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, what is the Verizon AVOC? I've seen it referenced in press releases and event announcements. How does one request a connection to a specific site? And he notes the only mention he's seen of it is in a Verizon promo video that he links there.
Go ahead, Jason.
Money. Lots and lots and lots of money. No, this is an extremely limited thing that I feel like Verizon kind of rolls out anytime they want to show that they're kind of on top of the fiber thing. It's somewhat limited. If I remember correctly, it's, the State Department uses it. It's kind of extensively in DC, maybe in Texas, but yeah, it is kind of like it's just its own private fiber backhaul.
Yeah, we use it. I've used it in the past. So, for instance, we had a setup where we needed to connect the space station to a venue, and one of the things that we had to do there is that NASA, and as I said, a variety of government agencies are all on AVOC in DC, and there's only a handful of places. So the building that I'm in right now actually has AVOC in this building, but it also has Vivix and the switch and 26 dishes on the roof and, all kinds of other fiber coming into the one building. And so, but yeah, the AVOC is about 50 feet that way. So anyway, it mostly is connecting to government agencies. So when we connected to NASA, we had to, what normally happens is you go down to Houston and then you go up to another satellite and then down to somebody. But that's a double bump. And then you can try to use Skype, or you can use, Hangouts or Zoom or whatever. And it's always, you want to get that full connection. So what we did is we were able to route it to DC through NASA's network. And then in DC, we were able to pick it up on AVOC and bring it over to us, and that cut our latency in half. So having those connections to those government agencies is really useful for something like, so AVOC is something you might buy into if you're a broadcaster, or if you're an organization that wants to constantly work with the not defense department, but the education department or something. They're all on AVOC. So, but it's a really old network. I don't think they're adding anything to it. I think the only reason you would get it is if you need to get a hold of the existing structure that's already there, because it's, I think people, every time we ask for it, people are like, is that still running? They have to go over and look. It's barely used. Next question.
Next question comes from Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado. And Jack says, what do I put between my Mac Studio or iPhone to input one and on my ATEM Mini Pro to supply YUV signals?
Go ahead, Alex.
I'm not entirely clear what Jack's asking here. Is he asking to send YUV signals? Okay, I'm confused what he's trying to do. I thought he was asking about Y2 uncompressed video from the ATEM, which it doesn't do over the USB-C.
Yeah, I think that I don't know why you would need to do that, to be honest. I think that you should just be able to plug I don't know with the Mac. I mean, I connect the Mac Studio all the time to my ATEM, and I don't have to do any kind of conversion. I just do a USB-C cable that has USB-C on one side and HDMI on the other, and I just plug them in, and it works. So that works there. For a phone, I do Lightning with an HDMI and Lightning adapter, and that Lightning adapter to give it power back to the phone. And so you have that dual adapter there. And you take that HDMI and plug it right into the computer. You do want to use the Apple adapter. Don't buy a third-party Lightning adapter. They seem to always work when you plug them in, and within a couple of weeks, they're like showing you a QR code and doing other weird stuff. And I've given up. so you want the HDMI to Lightning adapter from Apple, and then you want the third-party ones have. I've bought a lot of them. They're all a disaster. Go ahead, Alex.
It actually just occurred to me. I think I know what he's asking, because the thing is the HDMI outputs on computers are typically RGB. So it sounds like he's trying to get it into that other space of YUV, which sounds like he's asking about a converter box.
When it gets an HDMI converter, it should do what it needs to do to give that a proper signal back to a monitor or to the switcher. You shouldn't need to, it's not going to assume an RGB signal is required for that. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'm assuming that he has some sort of processing that requires a YUV. He's working in color space. He's probably doing color correction.
It's YUV. To be clear, it's YUV when it goes into the ATEM. Like it has to be YUV. It's not doing the ATEM doesn't process RGB.
But if you had a secondary piece of equipment that required a YUV connection, he might want to get it out of his Mac Studio and into that processor before he comes back to the computer. So the YUV connection, he's just looking for ports.
When you have an HDMI out, when you convert to an HDMI, it is YUV exiting the computer, unless you hard set it to something else. You shouldn't have to do anything other than the cable. Next question.
Next question comes from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. I know we'll discuss next week, but live audio performance in meetings will allow our happy birthday singing in sync. Will it be used? Oh my God, that's a religious question.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, I hope it will be used, and I hope it'll do a great job. There is a small little issue with that, and that it really is dependent on a lot of factors, like, for instance, what kind of computer that you're attaching to Zoom for coming into office hours. If it's underpowered, then you're gonna have a little bit of latency. Another factor is if I was to take my camera and my microphone and go directly into the computer and then go into Zoom, I'd have a better least amount of latency than what I normally do, which is go into vMix, put the video in there, put the audio in there, let the sync happen there, and then push that to Zoom. So there's going to be a little bit of miss on that, depending on what you have. And then, of course, I didn't even get into network, and because that can be a big factor if you have a slow network.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
In our birthday singing disaster is not a bug, it's a feature. So I think even if this gets in there, we will have to find some random delay thing for each participant to mess it up totally.
I don't think it's going to make any major improvement to what we're doing. We're not very good at it. That's the problem. We don't get enough practice. So we just, so next question.
Nigel Dessau in Austin, Texas. I am considering trading my Fuji camera gear for a full-frame Sony, primarily for still rather than video, but also to have a better B camera for video. Thoughts on which one? Is the A7 IV the current favorite, or did I miss something?
Yeah, I think that if you can afford the A7 IV, it looks amazing. I've used the A7 II, the A7 R2 and S2, and they were very, very I was very, very successful with those. I haven't gone up to it, but I believe the 4 now has a 61 megapixel image. Now go ahead, Nigel.
They've just made my life more complicated. And by the way, Sony product management, congratulations. That if you naming is awful. They now have an A7 R4A. So nice. Now I'm trying to work out what the difference between the A is, whether it's just a variation, a spec jump, or there's something fundamentally different. So,
right, yeah. I don't know what the difference is there. I know that I have been hankering for an excuse to get the 4 in my hands so that I can test it with photogrammetry, because that resolution is super interesting to me about being able to gather that much data every time I shoot for modeling, and I just haven't had a time to work on it. But the other A7s that we've used in the past, the A7 R3 and the 2, have been very successful. Next question.
Joe Kidd in the Bay Area, California. In the U.S., does a carrier with fixed wireless broadband exist that markets hardware supporting bridge mode? Has there been any progress in the underlying protocols to better support this model over current cell data infrastructure? Thanks.
Go ahead, Jason.
The last time I heard about anything along these lines, first, there's no such thing, as far as I know, as a carrier that like guarantees bandwidth. Like, it's just not a thing. But the last time I remember this even getting a bump was carrier aggregation on the last iteration of what they did before 5G.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up with this one. Alex, what makes Final Cut better for faster edits versus Resolve's cut page?
Bill can probably talk to that as much as anything else, but the magnetic timeline, it just makes everything go so much faster, and you're just sitting there just popping things through and not thinking about tracks in the same way. And it's not just the magnetic timeline in one thing. It's all, you may have a 5 or 6 tracks, and as you cut things away in that base track, everything's just kind of closing up and expanding, and you're moving things in and out. And there are so many things like that. It's not just the magnetic timeline. It's a lot of other bits and pieces that just make the whole thing a lot easier to move very quickly. The edit, I'll be honest with you, I don't know anybody that uses the cut page. It's I'm sure that somebody out there is using the cut page. I get where Blackmagic's trying to go, but all of us just go straight to edit, and just go to the edit page and start editing. I don't understand the cut page, to be honest. Go ahead, Bill.
So when Randy Ubilos rethought, and he was the inventor of Premiere originally, and when he rethought things to do Final Cut the original, and then eventually morphed into Final Cut 10, when he sat down to redo 10, his thinking was this: the world is full of too much content, and it comes into an editor's desk, and it's difficult to organize and understand. So he put in these basic concepts like range reject, where you could take the camera was left rolling. I don't ever want to deal with this stuff. There's nobody in front of it. Let me just get rid of all that stuff. So he put in first this database that lets you pare down, reject, and focus on the most important content out of the flood that's coming in. Then he married that to the magnetic timeline, so you could take these pre-trimmed, that's kind of a bad way to describe it, but you can take the things that you have decided you want and magnetically attach them to each other in a system that makes its own internal magnetic sense, that just means that you can just get out of the thinking about how to do things and start almost painting with video. That's how I see it. I became first twice as fast, then 4 times as fast, in terms of being able to accomplish the same projects I had before using this magnetic system. And when you have to revise things, when a client comes back with notes, I am literally 10 times faster to make changes on existing programs than I ever was back when I was a linear track-based editor. So it's transformative if you dive into it and learn how it works. And I still get things that would have taken me 3 days to do in the old system done in 3 or 4 hours commonly. It's the way it's built.
The thing that really makes it hard is oftentimes people will try to make Final Cut run like Premiere, like they or run like Resolve, and they want to try to force it to do tracks because that's the way they knew how to do it. And what we did at Pixel Core is the week after it was released, we just had Steve Martin and Mark Spencer come into our office and train us for 4 days, and we just went whoop we're just going to switch over. I'm not going to try to figure this out. There was nowhere to go. And so we just ramped everybody up. And from then on, we were doing everything in Final Cut. And it was pretty rough. The first year or two, there was some bugs. It didn't have any, it was missing a bunch of features. But it's paid off, and we've never paid for an upgrade. So, but it's paid off over time. I think it's really hard to argue that any other app is as fast as Final Cut as far as generating content. There's a lot of arguments of why you might use something else. As I said, I use Resolve half the time because of some of the stuff that I do. But I when it comes to speed, by the time I set a project up in Resolve, I could have finished some of the projects that I did in Final Cut. And so that's the difference. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Neil Alviedo. It looks like, or I hope that I'm getting that right, Boca Raton, Florida. And Neil says, what's the opinion on Unreal Engine 5.2 on Apple Silicon?
Well, we're excited about it. I haven't gotten a chance to sit down and install it. I had some kind of user problem that I was to install it in from the marketplace or whatever. So I'm working on that. But I think it's really exciting that they put it. I'm kind of surprised that they ported it, to be honest, given the troubles that Epic has had. But all reports are that the performance is off the charts, and so a lot of us have stayed away from putting Unreal Engine on the Mac because it was running really badly. And now it seems to be running very well. We don't know if it's compatible with absolute everything right now, but we're taking a look at that right now. But it looks really promising. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alexander Knight in Vancouver, British Columbia, here on the panel. Mackie has released the first podcast mixer to support Dugan Auto Mix with some other unique features. Looks incredible. It's $799 US. Thoughts?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I do see it has an auto mix in it. I don't know if I didn't see the Dugan brand brandished about, but it looks interesting. I think they're going after the Rodecaster Pro. The things I like about it, in difference to the Rodecaster Pro, it has a larger touchscreen, which is very handy, an 8-inch touchscreen as opposed to the one that's on the Rodecaster, which is only about a 5-inch. And the other thing I like, if you look at the inputs down here, they have the four XLR inputs that are combo, either XLR or a 1/4 inch, and they have 5 and 6, a left and right 1/4 inch input, and they have a 7 and 8 mini plug here for 2 more inputs. So it has a lot more inputs that you can control on this mixer than the Rodecaster Pro does. And I think Rodecaster could probably do catch up and change with a firmware update, add auto mix, which they're probably going to do. And I don't know the quality of the preamps. Mackie has had pretty good Onyx preamps for a while now. So I expect it's pretty good there and should work with most dynamic mics, but haven't tried it yet.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Yes, a couple things. First of all, the screen's actually 10.1 inches, so it's gargantuan in size. As far as the preamps, these are modified. They took their Onyx design preamps and modified them. So these are 80 dB of gain. The traditional Onyx preamps were 60 dB. So you could drive a vintage RCA ribbon microphone with these preamps. It's just absolutely insane. The other thing too with the interface is that they have 3 different modes. So I forget what they call it, but there's like a easy mode where it just is pre-configured. It adds the compression, all the dynamics processing. You have no adjustment over the settings. Then it has like a semi-pro feature where you can tweak some settings, but you won't get too lost. Then the advanced mode, the EQ in the advanced mode, the compressor, you have full access to all the parameters. The EQ is interesting. I've never seen on a podcast branded type of product like this where they give you a full parametric EQ, just like on a more professional live mixer where you've got all the touch points of the different frequencies, and you can see the actual audio coming in behind those points, and you can see where the problems are, and you can notch out a problem on the graph. So that's really, really cool. It doesn't have the 2 USB interfaces that the Rode has. That may not be a deal breaker for a lot of people. For me, I think the auto mix is the biggest, most important selling point of that thing, and that's what has me excited about it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a Dugan auto mix. The reality is that the patents for the Dugan auto mix ran out quite some time ago, and Behringer tried to put in Dugan-like auto mix, and there's a lot of trouble. So you can put auto mix in. The problem that you always get into is that a lot of us are looking for Dugan. Like we're looking for the name, even though a lot of people can produce something that works very closely to what the Dugan auto mix does, without calling it a Dugan auto mix and paying licensing fees for it. Although I do think that whatever licensing fees that Dan is asking for, it's well worth it. It's kind of a brand of excellence of this is what we're doing, and there's a certain level of trust that a lot of people have related to it saying Dugan auto mix. And I think that it's always, people are always missing the boat when they don't go ahead and just pay Dan some money and put the name on it. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Nowhere on the Mackie website does it say Dugan on it. It just says auto mix. Auto mix. And that's that. Other than that, everything that everybody has said, I would want to have the multiple USBs especially because of phones that don't have audio jacks anymore, and bringing in audio via USB would be a better thing. Plus, with the Rode, the new update to accept wireless microphones and a couple other features, and the buttons on the side of the Rodecaster outweigh the Mackie. This is going to be for a higher end studio. If you're setting up a studio 4-person podcast situation where people are going to walk in and you're going to be controlling in the other room, I think that's going to be perfect. But if it's just the average person doing a show from their living room or whatnot, then they'll save the $100 and go for the Rodecaster Pro.
I'll go with Alex.
One last thing, I'd recommend watching. Curtis Judd did a really good in-depth review of the DLZ creator, and they actually did an auto mix test with a couple of people just so you could actually hear what it sounds like. For those that have never used auto mix, it's kind of cool to be able to see, well, what does this do to the actual noise floor? So,
and in my opinion, you can't do a round table in the same room without an auto mix. It's live. I mean, you can record them all and then you're going to fix it all later, but the auto mix is just so important to what we do. Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas is up next. How many categories of apps do you have on your phone, and how many total apps, and is there an automated way to tally these?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't found an automated way. I go 1, 2, 3. And the problem with, I don't categorize mine that much. I have them all alphabetical in one big folder. I do have some Google apps in a separate folder and so on. But I found when I try and organize them by folder, I forget which folder I put the app in. And then it's a hunt and peck to find, is it in this folder? No. Is it in this folder? No. Is it in this folder? No. It's much easier to find it in an alphabetical list.
Go ahead, Jason.
If you go to settings and then about, if you scroll down, it will tally your apps. Right now, my tally is 414, and I don't care about categories.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I do use the iPhone's native binning system. I call it that. I don't know what they actually call it, but if you press and hold on your phone, the apps will start shaking, and you can drag like apps on top of each apps, and they make kind of a little pod of apps for a style. So I have all my audio recording apps in a one little pod. I have all my video processing apps in another little pod. And it takes the confusion of, oh my gosh, I've got 400 apps and I've got 9 pages I have to scroll through to get there. And it turns it into 5 or 6 pages. It's a really convenient little thing. And if you get used to it, the only downside is that each icon can only show you 9. And so if you have more than 9, 9, 3, 6, 9, yeah, you have to swipe left and it'll show you more. So you can get apps buried under other apps, but you can also go into those pods and physically rearrange them so that the 9 most used apps in your bulk mail pod or whatever you want can be the ones that are displayed.
I have to admit that all I do is search. I just thumb down and type in what I'm looking for and then move on. I don't try to find them. The first page or two have 99% of what I'm using. First 3 pages have 99% of what I'm using. If it's after the first 3 pages, I am just searching and finding what I need because I've got probably 250 apps on there, and I don't really think much of it there. A quick reminder that, of course, you can keep on asking questions. Definitely vote on the questions also if you're watching. But you can ask questions for the first hour. Remember, we're talking about Cine Gear in the second hour. So if you have suggestions of how you'd like us to talk about Cine Gear, go ahead and throw those in right now. Also, if you have questions about Cine Gear and the coverage, go ahead and throw those in for the second hour. And again, you can still ask questions for the first hour, but make sure to vote on those questions as well so we know what order you'd like us to cover them in. Next question.
Alton Christensen in New York City says, speaking of resolution for photogrammetry, Canon released an update to the R5 that allows for a 400 megapixel image capture, tripod recommended. And he's got a link there to get more info.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'm immediately suspicious of this for one reason and one reason only. I've never liked the EOS utility. And in order to do this stitching, it as far as I can tell, is required. So, again, neat trick, but I'm not sure how useful it'll actually be in practice.
And I believe the Sony has another one that's not quite the same resolution, but I think it's 256 mega. You know, it's another 256 megapixel. Now, what the Sony does is it actually moves the sensor, so it just goes, and then it puts it pieces it all together and gives you a massive photo. You can't use that for photogrammetry because any kind of computational photography that changes that is going to make it very, very hard for your for your photogrammetry. It has to be a single image. Even the Apple, if you use the Apple and it starts doing computational images, and that includes like zooming part way in not using a pure lens, the Apple or your photogrammetry stuff will get confused very, very quickly. It needs to have the correct focal length and all the stuff that's there that starts to get tweaked when you start doing computational photography. So that's one place you don't want to do that is when you're doing photogrammetry. Next question.
Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. In terms of I/O and stream health specs, does the panel recommend the Web Presenter HD over the Elemental Link?
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, I know that there's a little bit of overlap here, but the two are in completely different categories. Based on the constraints of your question, you cannot beat the Elemental Link, and the price reflects that.
Yeah, if you're trying to do an integration, so the Web Presenter has a couple of features. If you're trying to do integration where you're using the Web Presenter to bring a computer input and a camera input, and you're going to put it into Zoom or you're going to put it into Hangout or Meet or Teams, the Web Presenter is great. And it happens to also be able to stream. And it gives you a great interface. I think it's one of the best interfaces to tell you what's actually happening. If you're trying to purely stream something, which is, we use the links every day for this show, you can't beat the link from a stability perspective. It's using a Zixi protocol with Elemental's special sauce. It's completely run from the cloud. It's a much more stable way to go. You're going to get a higher quality stream. It's going to be more reliable. It's a mission, a single mission box. Whereas the Web Presenter has a lot of other things. They are, as Jason said, two different worlds. You may end up with both of them in the same kit. They're not really competing with each other. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois is up next. Do all the newer Blackmagic ATEM switchers include input scalers to mix cameras with differing frame rates?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, it'll match up frame rates. I don't think it will scale in that respect, different sizes, different resolutions, but it will match up frame rates if it's 1080i versus 1080p or PSF or whatever. Because it's an HDMI input, it requests, they talk back and forth and agree on the common resolution and input, and then it resynchronizes everything vertical. It syncs up the vertical sync between everything. So it matches them up, and that's all the new ones. The original Television Studio didn't. You had to use a 1080i input in it. And they didn't have to be synchronized necessarily, but you had to have 1080i, that frame rate coming in.
When you do that conversion, you add latency to the entire system. So you just know that if you start, when everything is lined up, you're going to get a lower latency than if you start adding things that require it to make those connections. It's by a frame, but it's still something you have to think about. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alexander Knight here on the panel, Vancouver, British Columbia. For those looking for alternatives to the X32, does the Yamaha TF series of digital mixers have blessed Dan Dugan Auto Mix? This was released in 2017 as version 3.5 firmware update. He's got a link there.
And I don't think that's a question. That's a statement that it does do Dugan Auto. Is that right, Alex? That it does do Dugan?
Yeah, and I it's not a question. It was just because I've heard a few times it saying that it didn't support it, but I double checked and it does. In fact, actually, that press release has a comment from Dan saying anyone that buys this is going to do really well with this Toucan Automix. So,
do you know how many channels it does? Does it do 8 or 16?
I think it's 8, but I'm not 100% certain. A lot of these seem to be 8.
Yeah, they seem to be 8. The QL series, I think, on Yamaha is 16. Which does make a big difference. There's a lot of things that we end up being really glad that we had that. But that's good to know. There was something else. I believe there was still something else that we didn't jump on the TFs because of the. I know that we looked at the TF rack series pretty seriously when we were, because I think it's only 2U instead of 3U, the way that the Behringer is. So it's a little deeper, but it's 2U, and so we were trying to lower the U's in our process. So we looked at those really closely. But there was something there was the Automix and something else, and when we were making that decision, which was in 2016 or 2015, before this was available. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado. Could you use AI for moderating chat identity, swearing, ad hominem attacks, and inappropriate texts?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I'm sure you could. Someone smarter than me, maybe Mr. Predo, could work out how to do that. But I think as you went through your sentence, you increased the complexity of the problem. I think you can filter swearing very well. You might be able to do ad hominem attacks, but inappropriate text is in the eye of the beholder. So all of this stuff gets a lot more complicated when you have to add context. And so you've got to be able to put the AI in the context. Personally, I just think a sarcasm font would be much more useful.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, most of these chats already have some sort of filtering system to it. So if, let's say, a new word like blah, blah becomes a swear word, that it could instantly be put in, where AI would really start to come into it, is start recognizing that the word blah, blah is a swear word or an inappropriate word, to start blocking it out. But the reality is there's a lot of these words that then go into cross. And so you're trying to chat into something, you're saying something that's not a bad word, and then you get blocked because it just sees that word and can't determine whether it's something that's going. That's where AI really would shine through.
Good, Bill.
Nigel, you've inspired me. I absolutely want a sarcasm font. It should be called Snarky Bold, and I want somebody out there in a font building world to start building it right now.
So there's a huge amount of work being done in this area right now, and the real problem that I think we're going to run into is a really important question, and I'm going to spend a moment on it. The real problem is people who are not well socially adjusted will not be included in the next generation of social media for very long, because the AI is going to identify poor behavior at a deep level and then just kind of push them to the side. And because the signal to noise ratio in social media is a real issue. So much noise of people, and people are going to be able to start to filter that out the way we filter out noise over the next 5 or 10 years with AI, where it's going to look at it very contextually. It's not going to just look at what you said. It's going to look at what you said in context with everything else that's going on. It's going to look at what you're doing based on what everybody else is doing at the same time. So it's going to look for pack behaviors. It's going to look for a lot of other things. And it's going to be able to pull those things out relatively quickly. And right now we have very simple algorithms, and we have some algorithms that can work. We built some for Mukana and other things. And so there's algorithms that we can use to do it, but they're very rudimentary. AI is going to allow us to be very exacting in that area. And the only thing that I wonder about is, where does that 20% of the population go? And it's about, really, most of the time we say, I'm being conservative, because most of the time we say that about 3% of the population creates about 90% of the problems on the internet. Some people have told me it's closer to 20 that create 100% of the problems. So I think that, but if those folks don't have a place to have an outlet or a place to go, we worry about, what will happen, but they could be completely shut out in the next decade, like just not able to be heard by anybody ever, because the system will be able to just kind of work them out of the process. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, there are dangers in this of blacklisting that, especially with co-located mail servers, I ran into this problem where my mail, the mail server for my website was co-located on one that somebody was using for spamming. And suddenly that mail server's IP address was just blacklisted. So none of my email was delivered. It wasn't marked. It was just black hole. Into the black hole. You never see it again.
And that shows you the problem with the crude systems that we have now, the kind of the carpet bombing versions of what this is, of like, we're just going to kill everything from that IP. But that's not what's coming. What's coming is that you can see what you see with Twitter is the certification process. They're going to start asking for that. And then what's going to happen in Twitter is they're going to stop spreading anything that isn't certified, and then they're going to stop, like they're turning the dials very slowly, but it's going to get to a point where you can't, it's not that you can't post, it's just that no one will see it. If you post into something, and right now there's, systems, our system doesn't do this, but there are systems that do what we call shadow banning. And shadow banning is I ban you from people seeing your posts, but you don't see that. So that means that you type in your comment and it pops into the social system. You're the only one that sees that. And so people sit there and they'll just bang and they can, companies, it's a manual process, but they can literally shadow ban a user because then the user doesn't try to get a new login. They just keep using the login that they have, but they're literally unheard. And that kind of ban probably exists in most social networks. And if you're really a problem, they'll just shadow ban you rather than ban you, because then you'll just think that you're still in the system. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think Alex was right. I was being a little flippant before, but this is a serious problem, probably compounded by the fact that we now have a generation of kids who were pulled out of the COVID panic from the normal social modes of being in school and having to learn some of the problems. We all went through that when we were young and did something ridiculous, and everybody said, stop doing that. You got some social pressure not to. With now this generation of kids doing all this education from home and just shutting off their cameras and withdrawing, it's going to be harder and harder to get those social cues and learn what is appropriate public behavior. And if what Alex is talking about compounds that, you're right. We could have a generation of way too many kids who don't understand how to behave.
Well, it's not just that they don't understand; it's just that they won't be heard at all. Like they just no one will even because we're going to have more and more online things. There's nowhere to go, and frustration comes out somewhere. And so we just have to be very careful of what happens when that happens. So we think about that a lot when we think about these filter systems. Next question. 100%.
Next question from Douglas Carmichael. It says, the FCC document about LPTV, low-power TV, in the U.S. It said that high schools operate low-power TV stations. Wouldn't most schools outside of tech-first private schools not have the resources for broadcast facilities and qualified full-time staff?
Go ahead, Jason.
No, that's not true. Part 74 of the FCC's ruling was established in 1982 when TV, was the thing, and a lot of large public high schools put in television studios. The amendment that you're talking about is just kind of a tweaking of the rules, probably having to do with federal funding to carve out that niche and allow it to continue.
Go, Jeffrey, real quick.
The funny thing is, yesterday I had this conversation with somebody that does deal with school education and broadcasting. I always thought it was hand-me-downs that a lot of people are getting, but he's going with these cities building brand new schools. They're actually getting the top-notch equipment to put in there. So all this technology is probably better than what you're working on right now.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, in my son's case, they had a daily newscast out of the grade school, out of the 5th grade class. And so they were learning the skills of that, and they didn't have low power. It was just inside as a learning endeavor in that grade school.
I know high school in the Bay Area that, looking for grants, raised $1.5 million. They have a really nice studio that's built in there. The money's there, and if you just have to show that you have someone that's focused on it and that will develop the students, and you can get the money. Next question.
Next question comes from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. A survey at voicejungle.com shows very little impact on the voice business due to AI offerings. Is AI voicing a bit of hype?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I would never do a survey from a company that's their main focus is to actually find people to do voiceovers for voiceovers. I'm not saying that they they skewed the numbers, but everybody that's coming to that website is skewing the numbers, and having more of an independent survey would be a better thing. There's still a lot of problems with AI voice, like for instance, inflections. Once that gets over that hump, then of course we'll have a whole world of new problems that we have to deal with, including deepfakes and all that other good stuff. But I think that right now it's at least 5 years out before we could really look at that survey again and see what the results would change.
Good, Courtney.
I think it will dilute the voiceover business because in the past, your choices were just the robot sounding accessibility feature of text to voice screen reader that was built into almost all devices versus hiring a live person to read your material. Now there's a third choice of having an AI chatbot read your material. Isn't as good as the live voice, but it's miles ahead of the robotic text to speech synthesizer built into your device. So it's going to dilute the market by a certain percent.
Good, Bill.
Huge debate in the voiceover community. I don't think we're going to solve this soon. There is a lot on both sides. It's going to change. It changed from when I was a young person, when only the people who had flexibility of schedule and some talent could go into a studio at 2:00 on a Tuesday and do voiceover because everybody else was working and they couldn't do it. With the breakdown and work from home, there's a gazillion people in trying to break into the voiceover market. And that means it is a mess right now. I do think that AI might take out some of the low 50% down work and take it back to where it was when I started, which is the best continue to work and everybody else has to do something else.
I think the real challenge is I think it's probably not 50. I think it's probably the bottom 80. I think for a lot of these kinds of things, the bottom 80% of many industries are just going to get wiped out by AI. It's the top 20% are going to be there. The hard part is how do you get new people in the top 20 if the bottom 80 doesn't exist? So if you think about it, it went from there's a gradient, like a ramp, an on-ramp to the highway has a certain level. Imagine if that on-ramp goes away and it's just a cliff that's 15 feet high. That how do you get new people in? This is a problem that they're having. For instance, our airline tickets are really expensive because there's not enough pilots and there's not enough people entering the pilot business. And so they're not able to, they're in a mismatch right now. And I think we're going to see more of that. Like, how do you train people to do something if they have to be an expert level? And so I think that things like what we're doing, and we're thinking about that a lot inside of office hours, because like, how do we build training that gets people coming out at a very high level of the training? This is not what we're doing right now. I mean, we're doing as much as we can. We're fixing one of the hardest problems, which is how do we give people real-time feedback? But in the future, we're thinking about ways that how do we build training programs and so on and so forth that allow you to come out at a near expert level when you pop out the other end with real production experience against all of those things. So when you see what we're about to talk about, it kind of blends in. When you see Cine Gear and you see what we're doing with volunteering for the show, we're trying to figure out how do we give people real world experience and real production experience in a volunteer capacity, because that may be the only way to do it in the future. Like there may not be a way to get a job to do this. You may do it in part-time and figure it all out in the same way that, if you can get very, very good at the piano and the guitar, but wow, all the stars have to align and you have to be exceptional to make it your business. If you're going to make you can't be an okay piano player and show up because there's so much supply, of that. And I think that's going to get more and more complicated. So it's a real, again, we're dealing with some real issues there. I think that Jeffrey's probably right, 5 years, but it could be as short as 2 years where you start to see maybe not all of the impact, but some of the impact. I will say, as a person who I do not listen to narrative on my my audiobooks. I listen to data, and I prefer the computer, like even the one now, because I can listen to it at a higher rate. When a person does it, the idiosyncrasies of their voice at 2x makes it hard to hear them, hard to understand what they're saying, whereas the precision of the current output of computer, just the raw one that comes out now, I can turn it up. I can turn the speed up and absorb the book faster. So I think that's now people who want to listen to Harry Potter, that's a whole nother thing. But even then, you're going to have 10 voices that are all generated by AI that are going to do all of these things. You're going to see it. It's going to feel a little rough and weird at the beginning, but it's going to get very good because there's going to be a lot of money flowing into that process. anyway, so it's going to be it's definitely something we'll continue to watch. If you're a high-end voiceover person, I don't think you have any problem. If you're getting into the market, it's going to be hard. So we've talked about it in the past. All right, we're now changing subjects to talking about Cine Gear. We had some back and forth, and so we finally, have an approval from Cine Gear that we're going to be able to add a bunch of people to the press list. We're going to be doing that today. So if you've signed up for it, if you haven't signed up for it, I didn't get it out yesterday, so there's a little bit of time. So while you're watching this, there's a link in Discord, and if you're interested in being on the panel, on the back end, or on the ground, especially on the ground, you can still sign up for about the next hour or so. Literally right when I get out of this show, I'm going to submit the press passes. And we're only asking for NAB. We asked for press passes for everyone. And that was by NAB's suggestion. I think with Cine Gear, we're not going to try to overwhelm people. So we're really only looking for press passes for people who are going to be there. And so make sure not to sign up if you're not going to be there. If you're not, don't sign up as someone who's going to be there if you're not, because we already have a pretty big list of people. So right now, I think we have about 25 or 30 people that have signed up. We've got a bunch of panelists. We've got people that are going to be on the ground. And we're taking a look at it. Now, Cine Gear goes from the Thursday through the Sunday. It's the 1st through the 4th. But the only days that the Expo are running are the 2nd and the 3rd. So we're probably not going to do anything except for the 2nd and the 3rd. And I'll give you an overview of what we're planning. And what we're really looking at is to talk amongst us as the panel, as well as hear your 2 cents about what it is. But I'll tell you how we're planning to do this. And if you're a volunteer, we have a meeting. You'll get an email on Monday where we're going to talk about this in more detail. But we want to get the overall view from the producers of what you like and what you don't like. So let us know in the comments and questions, or in questions specifically. If you put it in the comments, I may not see it. If you put it in questions, you can put comments into questions for this segment to let us know, because we'll bring them up in the show and discuss them. So the idea is that we saw some stuff at NAB. So we threw a bunch of stuff at the wall at NAB. We attempted to do some VOD. That didn't come out as well as we'd like because of bandwidth issues. We did a bunch of stuff in after hours. We did 2 live shows. We did an HDR test. So we're trying to take what parts of those did we really like? We definitely liked the live. The live show was really good. And by the way, the reason we got approved for Cine Gear was because of the great work that was done at NAB. We were able to send that out as an example, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, you can come." So anyway, so basically, we have now we also have to look at what kind of hardware we have. But so the live show I think went really well. The thing that we want to clean up from NAB is dealing with the latency. So it's mostly we're going to probably practice some of that on Thursday. And even next week, we can take it out and do testing with it. We want to get to what's the behavior that makes the live view work. So we're going to turn the latency down on the live view. I got some new tools to the interface and some new tools to see if we can get the IFB working a little bit better. I'm also looking, there is a way to send a return signal back, and we're going to take a look at that and see how that works. So next week, we're going to be doing a little bit of R&D to see if we can't really tune that live view for what we need. We are talking, I think we're going to have some wireless transmitters that we're going to be able to use. So, we can potentially, for the live show, have multi-camera. So we should be able to have a couple cameras that are not wired, but wireless, using Teradeks to come back to back to the live view. So we could get multiple angles. We are going to focus for the live show. We have a lot of people available, but for the live show, we're going to try to go pretty long so we can spell people in and out. But we are also, so we won't, our goal is to probably go from about 11 a.m., potentially 10, but definitely 11 a.m. until, 4, 5, 6 o'clock. That's going to get split up a little bit. The panel discussion will depend on how many panelists are available and whether they're available during that time. Probably we'll do a 4-hour session that is the live view with a handful of cameras. If there's enough panelists to cover that section there. I think I really like, and put in comments if you have the opinion of what you think and everything else. I like the long show. I like us just wandering around the show and doing our thing, and not. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to build a VOD version of this. I'm just trying to build we're going to explore together. So we're going to have one live view to work with. That's the one that live view has supplied us. We still have the electrosonic mics that we had before. We had the electrosonic IFBs, which we had a little trouble with, not with electrosonic, but with the way we were delivering those back. So we're going to get that fixed up next week. We are so we have those pieces coming together. So the idea is between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. we're doing the live show. And again, it can roam a little bit because we're hoping we're going to get at least bolts, but we're hoping to potentially get rangers, which give us a lot of range, to go out places. And we don't know for sure, and we're going to test this on Friday. We don't know if we can get into what happens is the way that the sound stages are built, they often turn into a Faraday cage for cell phones and cell devices. And so what we think we're going to have to do is take the live view, park it, have someone stand at the entrance, and then have the rangers go into the system so that we can get the live back and forth. So trying to figure that. We're going to be doing tests. So Friday is really testing, to see what we can and can't do. And then Saturday will be the show. And then after 3, we'll take the system, we're going to break it down and set it up for HDR. And then we'll go back out and do HDR at 5.1. I've got new cables being built right now by Gotham Sound. And I've got, we're getting some new hardware to tie this more tightly together. And then we're going to go out and try to cover it again, doing HDR and 5.1, which should be really cool. There's a bunch of this that's outside, so the outside stuff should look and sound pretty interesting. So we're going to look at that, but that'll be the 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock range. May not be the whole time, but we're going to do at least an hour of HDR and 5.1 to take it to the next, all these extra cables and all this extra stuff that we had. Can we condense that down into something that makes more sense? And so we're going to be working on that. The idea for Friday is, of course, testing the rigs, seeing where our coverage is. You'll still see some stuff that we're throwing into after hours and playing with it. We may broadcast some things to YouTube as unlisted streams as we figure some stuff out related to that. And then we're going to the other big thing that we're going to do, though, is the big time that we're going to focus on after hours is going to be Friday. So the idea is that everyone who's on the ground, we really want them to go out and show cool things, in the and we're going to have some folks that are offsite. We may do some, we're going to be doing some editing. We're going to try that again. I'm still trying to work out what bandwidth we're going to use where to get that uploaded. I'm trying to get something on site. It may not be on site, but it might be nearby. So we're working on that. But the main thing is that we will, we want people to go and pay attention to what we're doing so we can cover them and start to build. This is, what we want to cover. We cover, so we're showing things from phones, basically. Hey, look at this. Hey, look at this. Again, we may have trouble. We're going to find out how much trouble we have when we go into the sound stages. We're going to find out how much, what it is outside. But the idea is it's kind of an open grill. I think there's going to be 10 or 12 of us on the ground. And so between the streaming tests and folks wandering around with their phones, the idea in Zoom, the idea is to feed a bunch of stuff back and talk about what's, what things are cool. I think it's going to be a really fun time in after hours. And that'll be pretty much from 10 a.m. on Thursday or Friday to 6 p.m. It's just going to be people going out and looking at stuff. We're going to try to organize the on crew so that they do take some time out. So they're not trying to do 6 hours. We have people that we say, these 3 people, we really want to make sure that you're doing this block of time and this block of time. And we're showing people things so that we really have something going on a lot of the time during after hours. And so after hours is going to be much more open. Again, the same thing, raise your hand with the phone, show it. So that's going to be much more open-ended, but that's going to help us guide. Like basically we'll put things into Discord and have people vote on things like this is what we really want to cover in detail for the live show. And so it's kind of the raw back end of what we make decisions of as producers. Really, the producers are taking that producer role of like, we really like this piece here. I think that the easiest way for us to do that is we will either use Mukana and put everything into that and vote on them, or we could do it in Discord in the same way. But I think that we may use Mukana for that, where people can put in like, this is the next booth that someone's just adding that. This is the next booth we're now looking at it in after hours, and then people can vote on that booth. We're not going to use it as a question. We could use polls if we wanted to, but we could also do questions so we can say this is a good one or a bad one, and we figure out what those look like. But it's kind of an interesting way to use that. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, you talked about lowering the latency this time around. Would we be testing that new Zoom low latency feature in the client to see if would that make any difference in what we're doing?
No, we're not. Well, for after hours, it might. I'm not worried about that as much. What I'm worried about is during the show, we're going to reduce the latency inside of the live view. So I think that when we did at least the first day of NAB, that latency was set. It's automatically set at 3 or 5 seconds or something like that, but it can go down to 0.6. And so we're going to test that on Friday to see if we can lower that latency on the live view to under a second. And then the other thing is, it's just the panelists knowing that, hey, there's a little latency there, and don't talk over people. So the panelists and the hosts all just need to know what the game is. This is not a new problem. Satellite hits from Afghanistan or Turkey or wherever have always had this big latency. It's just people on both ends need to practice what they're going to do. And a practiced talent will just nod until the person stops talking and then start talking. And you just have to know that you can't jump into it. You need to wait until you hear them, and then you start talking again into it. And that's what we have to, get better at as we do this next piece. Go ahead, Courtney.
I was just looking at the schedule, and Friday the expo doesn't open till noon.
Then we'll start at noon. I thought it started at 10.
But the next day, day 3, it opens at 10. So
So we'll so Friday we'll start at noon, and again that'll give us time to kind of work on things and so on and so forth. But Friday's really just an R&D time frame for us of figuring stuff out, jumping into after hours, putting all those things together, and then on Saturday we will broadcast. And we'll probably start at 11. There's some stuff for the team to get started. There's actually a volunteer meeting on that Saturday, and I'm pretty committed that volunteer meeting is never moved. So that's why now we can start early, but I want to kind of let the volunteers be in that meeting too. So I don't want to turn everything on and have it, not be there. So we're going to probably start a little later, and it just gives our team a little more time to get set up as well. So anyway, so that's what that's what the plan is. Let us know as producers, throw comments or questions into Mukana as a question, and we'll discuss those things. But those are the things that we're thinking about right now. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, just in case there may be somebody listening who doesn't understand why Cine Gear is such a different show than anything else we've attempted to do, it is an outdoor kind of thing on the Paramount lot in Hollywood. And so part of it takes place in the mock cities that you have seen in the background of TV shows forever. It's got a whole outdoor there. But then there's, I think, 5 or 4 sound stages where they shoot big content, again, on the Paramount lot, where they do exhibits there. So we're going to have a massive area to cover. So the fact that we have multiple teams will be going probably, I would assume, to different areas. Teams will be going out to different things. And you may be in the particular sound stage where Blackmagic is set up and another company that typically is more computer video oriented. And then there's tons of the big techno cranes and things like that are massive parts of the Hollywood major film industry that we'll also be out with. So I'm just really fascinated by this. I think it's going to be really exciting to get this kind of behind the scenes look, walking around on a major movie set, series of sets. It's an extraordinary opportunity for all of us to go out there and see how the stuff gets made.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, and basically, if you think about in NAB, we had the North Hall, the Central Hall, and the South Hall. Well, not South Hall this time, the West Hall, and all the things that you really want to shoot. There's some things in the North Hall, but all the things you really want to shoot is the Central Hall. That's where all the eye candy is. That's what we learn every single time. The Cine Gear is just the Central Hall. So almost everything, because this is film production, and there's not going to be booths about. Well, we don't expect to have a lot of booths about how to distribute your content via IP and everything else. This is like hardware and cameras and things. And so we think that it's going to be a great space for us to, there's going to be a lot to look at. That's what we saw in the past. And so I think it's going to be pretty interesting on how we make that actually work. So we're excited about it. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, if going from past Cine Gears, if it works in the hangars, you'll have the small things. You'll have the lighting. You'll have stuff like that. Then you'll go outside the hangars, and then you'll hang a right, and then you're in New York. It's beautiful. And that's where you're going to see the big stuff. You're going to see the stuff that can't go into the hangars, the jibs, the drones, the zip lines, and all that other good stuff. And it'll be a good fun time going through the streets and seeing all the stuff that you don't see at NAB because A, it's hard to transport, and B, it's just way too big.
Yeah, and it's less expensive for a lot of these companies. You'll see more smaller companies because it's less expensive for the companies to set up their booth and be part of this than it is at NAB. Just from a travel, a lot of them are LA based, and so it's a really interesting. I missed it a lot of years because of I oftentimes was working that week, and so I'm really excited to be back after maybe a decade. Go ahead, Courtney.
They're not hangars; they're sound stages.
Yeah,
shoot motion pictures. There's no airplanes in there. Here's the layout of the lot. These stages over here, 14, 15, are pretty large stages, and 70. And one of these may be for one of the seminars stuff that's going on there, and not exhibits. I'll have to look closer. And there's also the tank there, which is the purple thing at the bottom. A lot of it outdoor. Big cranes and stuff. A lot of time they'll put in the tank, which is actually a parking lot.
Yeah, so we're pretty bullish on it. I think it's going to be a really fun one. It took us a little while to get through a couple things there, so we didn't want to do this meeting until we knew that was going to happen. But it has all the things have kind of locked themselves in. So we're probably excited. Again, if you're interested in doing this or being part of it, either offsite, panel, or onsite, there's a form in Discord in the announcements. You can fill it out right after the show. I'm going to be submitting pretty much the final list to the process to make that happen. So definitely fill that out if you're interested. Please don't fill it out if you're not gonna do it. It's only fill it out if you're going to be there, not be there, but do something on this project. Let's go to the first question.
The first question this morning from Douglas Carmichael: what sort of communications links will we have to and from the show site?
The main communications are just going to be Zoom on Thursday, and then of course we'll have Unity Comms on the on site there. So we'll be using Unity Comms as well as the talkback to the live view. The reason that the talkback to the live view is important is because it does give us a more solid connection than what we would get from a basic cell return from Unity. So we're working on getting that really to be smooth and working. We have the hardware to go into the system on our side, and we were missing a couple little converters on the way out of the live view, and we're going to be working on refining that over next week to make it as clean as possible and feed that data then back into a transmitter for the IFBs. So we think that that's going to make it a lot smoother, and we just didn't quite get that done. All the equipment came right before we went to NAB, and we weren't able to quite get all the integration done. So we're really excited about getting all the electrosonic stuff and with in the live view all tied in. Next question.
Next one comes from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. What sorts of asynchronous roles will be available for volunteers?
We are going to be shooting some more VOD. I mean, I think that I'll probably be shooting more VOD on Friday than we did before, mostly because I'm not speaking anywhere, and I'm not going to do that again. So anyway, so I'll be shooting some stuff. I think that we'll have other people that's part of what we're going to talk about on the Monday meeting, is figuring out who wants to do what. And we are going to try to set, we just need me to shoot 3 things and Bill to shoot 3 things and Jeffrey to shoot 3 things. And so we're just going to be not like a big hodgepodge, but let's find the things that we're going to cover. And that's some of the stuff we can do asynchronously beforehand, is do a lot of research of the people that are there. Where do we know we want to grab some videos? We don't know how good the transmission is going to be in those sound stages. And so we may, the video that we shoot may be the only thing that gets out the door. So, and I'm going to be experimenting with shooting both with my phone as well as this FX30. So we're going to be kind of playing with kits for both of those. Go ahead, Courtney.
I know it doesn't fit into our broadcast pipeline, but did you talk to them? Are we able to get onto the Paramount? There is Wi-Fi routers inside those stages, which is pretty good connectivity, but whether we'll have access to it or not it won't fit into our pipeline though, probably, since we're using cellular. Yeah,
the biggest thing I'm trying to do is find somewhere that I can get bandwidth, like a lot of it, to upload things. That's the big thing that with the transmission, I'm kind of leaning into just making the live view work with cells and point to points, and not we're going to test it when we get down there. But right now we're going to try to figure it out and keep it as simple as possible. And then we'll kind of expand. I don't want to build a pipeline around finding Wi-Fi from a convention center because it's been really difficult, in the past.
Well, it's not a convention center. Technically, it's a movie studio, and they have their own LAN infrastructure and Wi-Fi on the stages. But
what I mean is
locked up pretty tight. You got to have passwords.
Yeah, and the problem that I have right now is that what I'm concerned about is building a model for how do we cover events, and building any model around the local Wi-Fi is probably I want to stay away from that just because I don't want to build something that we really like from Wi-Fi having there and then not be able to do it on the next one, because I think the chances of us being able to do it repeatedly are very low. Next question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. Will there be pre-planned segments so producers have time to submit questions based on where you are going instead of the booth you just left?
Yeah, so this is where it's going to be important. So on Friday, we're going to be washing through these fairly quickly, like, hey, check this out. Hey, check this out. Hey, we're going to be asking questions to the folks there and doing research on it. So the idea is then we're going to put stuff in. We got to think a little bit about how we're going to do the voting structure. I think what we're going to do is not manage the questions, but just use Mukana, and we'll just put in, hey, we're visiting the Teradek booth. We're visiting the Sound Devices booth. We're visiting this. And people just vote those up and down as to whether they think those are great booths to cover the next day. Then we'll give you a schedule at the end of Friday or first thing on Saturday morning. This is where we plan to go. And so, and then this is going to go back to the older ones of like, these are all the places that we're planning to go. We'll have some discussions on that probably Friday evening where we, get into after hours after, 6:00 on Friday after we've done the coverage. We'll sit down in after hours and just talk about, okay, let's make a plan. And that plan is partially based on where they are. It's partially based on what we're interested in. It's partially based on, like, for instance, we have to really make a decision about, unless there's something brand new, I'm not that interested in covering really big booths because we can get all that information. What I'm really looking for, what are the smaller things that we want to grab onto? We may cover those big booths in passing, and we may still cover some of them, but we don't want to make the whole thing about the big brands because they have plenty of PR. What we want to do is try to find the things that you wouldn't see normally, which include things like Technocrane. I mean, you see Sony, Arri, Blackmagic. Those things are all things that have tons of PR and everything else. Most of us don't get to see a Technocrane very often, and it's one of the cooler things on the site in general. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and if you're going to submit questions or things you'd like to see, go to the Cine Gear site and click on the Expo map, and you can zoom in there and see the names of all the booths and where they are and who's adjacent to who. There's J.L. Fisher right there. And so you can see who's going to be exhibiting and search the list of exhibitors so if you know they're going to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that go ahead, Courtney.
No, I'm sorry, I just muted accidentally.
Yeah. And so we'll definitely be talking about it. And again, the team that's working on it should be doing some of the research and figuring out, like, we can start, having more tight discussions about that, because that can also drive what we look at in after hours. Let's make sure that, we can look at this before that Friday over the next 2 weeks and say, Bill is going to go look at these 20 things, on Friday afternoon. And Jeffrey's going to look at these 20 things and they're going to, and so we cover a lot of those things. And after hours will be this kind of popcorn jumping from one thing to the next, so to speak. And then we'll make decisions about what we want to cover for the show. And then we'll look at the things, the top, we can decide how many we're going to get through per hour, but we'll have to, this goes back, this is kind of a mixture of what we did in the past with IBC and with NAB and with NAM and Cine Gear before, which is that we will have a direction that we're going. And we're going to be getting there, and we will probably have a lot of tags that are going up that we have to manage, during that live stream, because there's going to be more of a organized, we're kind of learning. We threw a bunch of stuff up at the, and I think we learned a lot in NAB about things. Now we're taking what we did at NAB, IBC, NAM, all the other ones over the last year, and we're going to mix them all together to make that more cohesive. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Dallas-Fort Worth area today. I like the diversity and style that we've had with covering events over the last 2 years, building knowledge each time. How do we not lose lessons learned as we have different crews?
Well, I think that these kinds of discussions, both before and after, make a big difference as far as us talking through those things. Now that we're kind of getting more regular and we have better, more refined equipment, we're going to be down there with a Blackmagic 12K, and like it's tied into the live view, so that we're able to do HDR 5.1, that type of thing. So, but we're gonna have a lot of the mics and a lot of those bits and pieces. But again, we're taking in this next version, we're taking a little bit of almost everything we've done over the last year and building a new show. So I think that I think it's us continuing to talk before the show about what worked and didn't work, and then talk right after the show, which we've done, about what works and doesn't work, so that we can kind of move through that. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. And Roscoe says, how do we find the most interesting person in the booth, or should talent just be one of us who has researched the product?
In general, there will be exceptions, and we do want to talk to people if we find the right person in every booth. But 80% of the time, my recommendation is that we just talk it. We just talk to it. We don't try to find someone at the booth to talk about it, especially if they're busy. We don't wait. We don't push, I will tell you that after doing this for 20 years, most of the time, one of us who can articulate what is going on in that will oftentimes do it better than anyone at the booth. They're too close to the product, and they start talking through a bunch of stuff that we don't need to know. There's kind of like marketing speak mixed with they know the product too well, mixed with, now there's occasionally we get an expert, like if we show up and there's, if Composite Components is there and Jonathan Erlin's there, we're going to ask Jonathan Erlin questions, because we don't get access to Jonathan very often. So that's an example of, hey, there's somebody there that really knows the product, and we can add content to it. But we're not going to do that by default. By default, what we should do is, what I've done for a long time is, I will look at the product, I will talk to the person, I will digest what they just said, including prices and so on and so forth. And then I just spit it out, and I just, and it's a relatively fast thing, maybe answer some questions. Again, if someone's available and we can do that, we will. But making that the only way we do it really slows the production down a lot. And so we'll probably not do that very often. Next question.
Next one comes from Kyle Hammond in Chicago. How will after hours be integrated and or used as a development center for the broadcast segments?
I think that, what we're going to do is on Friday from noon to 6, it's all after hours. Like that's going to be a great 6 hours of just, we're not trying to turn it into a show. We're not trying to discuss it in the way that we would otherwise. We're covering booth after booth after booth with the different teams and really absorbing that. In a perfect world, if Cine Gear was one more day, that would be the first day, and then we'd be broadcasting 2 more days after that. This is a little more of the percentage than we would normally want. But I think that it's going to really make a huge difference in how we cover events in the future, is to have the first day always be this kind of after hours chaos of us going through it. And if we get to a point where there's too many log jams, where the big thing I'm concerned about with after hours, and we're going to do one room this time, because we didn't break one room last time. Like I felt like it's not like we reached capacity there. But if too many of us are sitting at a booth for too long to show something, more than 10 minutes, to show a specific booth, then I think that we will start to look at multiple rooms, start breaking things up. But I don't want to do that I don't want to start fixing things that aren't broken yet. So we know that is a potential problem. We have ideas on making more rooms and so on and so forth. But what I don't want to do is subdivide the audience, because I think that and what we need to do on the ground is be very succinct. Like, hey, this is really cool. And we have to be conscious too, there's 3 people behind us and we're just going to talk. We're not there to do the coverage, because we're going to do coverage the next day or other things, but we are there to kind of make a decision and do some coverage, but not the whole piece. And then we have to remember that what we want to do the next day is really not spend more than 3 to 5 minutes at any given booth. This isn't a stand up for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, because if we want someone for that long, then we will bring them into after hours. I mean, not after hours, second hours down the road. So, and give them a whole hour to talk. So anything that we think is that interesting that we would spend 15 to 20 minutes on, it's probably interesting enough for a second hour. And so we want to kind of, manage our resources that way. Go ahead, Courtney.
Will the after hour sections on Friday be recorded for playback later on YouTube, or not at all, just live?
The only thing that's going to be recorded is the Saturday sessions. The after-hour sessions, you're just going to have to be there and be part of that process. It's going to be So not going to record it. Probably never record it. It's just I want to keep it fluid and rough and not think about it and not think it's going to go anywhere at any point in time. So that'll be, that's a warning. If you think it's important to you, you may want to carve out some time. But Saturday, we'll be taking the best of that and actually doing a broadcast and recording all of it. And again, we will be recording other sessions. We may decide, this is the thing we're in after hours. Let's record a section about that so that people can see it. Next question.
It comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. And Roscoe wonders, is there any way we might visit some of the free sponsored talks and or panels, as many are very interesting and not always product focused?
I have to ask for permission for that and to see if that's doable. A lot of times they don't want to do that because they're showing footage of things that they don't have rights to. So usually we won't be able to do that because it opens up a pretty complicated problem as you unwrap it, is because they may not even know. And so they may say yes, and then they tell us that we shouldn't have put it up there. And so you could see some of that in after hours. We won't put it on. We will not go to the talks and panels. Cine Gear is already a little sensitive about those things, and I don't want to. I want us to build a great relationship with the organization, and so I'm not going to probably ask for too much on the first pass of having this many people on the ground. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I concur with this entirely. There are areas on the lot like the Sherry Lansing Theater and other places where they do these things, but having tried to do some things with NAB's future media concept stuff in the back, the best I ever got out of there was just a quick kind of look in the door and say, this is what is happening here. If you ever come to Cine Gear, you can do this, but not actually trying to capture the content.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a future that could include content that's online and make it more, I think that the digital first, this is where we're trying to get ourselves to as we research this. I just don't think it'll be this year. We're just managing how much we put ourselves out. Next question.
Ronnie Hofsøy in Tromsø, Norway. How do we identify the newest stuff among all the vendors?
The first step is that over the next couple of weeks, we'll be researching what we can see. As Courtney said, there's a map. There's a list of those that you can look at those vendors. We're going to look at what things might be interesting there. And that's where a lot of the team that's signing up right now, especially if you're off site, you're not going to come on site. This is stuff that you could do right now that will make a big difference, is to try to figure out what we think we might want to cover in those areas. And we'll probably have some more meetings, definitely the Mondays before the event, as well as some probably in between meetings to really think about what those things might be. And then that after hour session is going to be where we kind of just do a lot of research. Next question.
Next one from Douglas Carmichael. And Douglas says, will we have a strategy for recruiting exhibitors for possible second hours if they receive a positive reception from our audience?
We've been handing out cards. We did print a lot of cards, and we've been handing out those cards. Hasn't been a lot of response to them. So, I don't know if that was the most effective way to do that. I think that the best thing for us to do is get the cards from the vendors and then send them an email saying, here's your product on that. That gives us a way to connect to them. So I think that getting cards from the vendors works better than handing them, but we're still going to hand out cards because someone may want to contact us. So, and maybe I could be wrong. Maybe Roy and Josh are getting overwhelmed by emails. I know that the ones I hung out with go directly to me, and you get a lot of response. Next question.
Mickey McAchore in Manila in the Philippines. Will there be sound mixers and or A2s in the field?
We're hoping to have someone, I don't know if they do that on a day-to-day basis, but we are hoping to have one or two people managing sound on the team. Remember, we have a fair number of people that are going to be on site. And in this case, we're only going to have one broadcast node. So as a result, we're going to be, we won't be jumping around the way we did at NAB. So now we may experiment with jumping around in the sense that if we get one thing we may try, this is one of the new experiments, depends on how many teradecks we get and whether they work well. I'm going to bring enough cameras that can do 1080p that we could theoretically have a couple rigs that we could be jumping from one location to another wirelessly, basically within a certain area, which could be most of the outdoor area. We could theoretically popcorn back and forth between locations by having these rangers going back to the live view. So the live view, it doesn't have to be at every location. There can be people with just the Ranger transmission back. The live view becomes a little bit of something that can't move because it'll have so much hardware on it. So I'm talking to Teradek about that, see what's possible. But in each case, we're hoping to have someone doing that. And again, the electrosonics, we want to test those as well. How far will those go? And can we cover? But the idea is that instead of having us have to walk from one to the other, it's not that we can't do anything. It's just that we have to kind of bounce around. And this may be something where we end up putting the live view on a cart, and so that we can kind of move the cart, but have the cameras further out doing their thing. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is the live view base station going to be AC powered, or is it going to be all batteries?
All battery. Yeah. Yeah. And we've used that. I mean, we'll give it more battery. I'm going to take the advantage of LA is that I'm driving down. So I'm going to be bringing a jackery system that will have underneath it. And then it has its own battery, and then it has some of its own V mounts. So there's a bunch of different things that the live view we hope that the live view will work for 4 hours with the power that we're bringing down, backup, the amount of backup power. So we should have that, but I do think that could end up being some kind of cart that we end up moving around so that it ends up being the central location. And then the cameras themselves will embed the audio into the camera and then transmit it back. But how that embeds will be, we have for my Sony, we have the hot mount XLR ins, whereas we might use mixed pre's for some of them, but all of that stuff, there'll be some audio there. And again, we have an overall audio engineer somewhere, but we may have these things that are doing more of the local embedding. So we'll have to play with it and see what happens. When we do, we will definitely have someone focused on that when we do the HDR and 5.1. We'll have a couple people focused on audio, getting it back. Because you have to have someone managing the surround mic, and we didn't really do a lot of management of the Scorpio, once we got it working. But I don't know if we have to look at who we have signed up as to who has, more robust stuff. We are going to be, because we have all the equipment now, we are going to be able to do a bunch of the tests and setups before we go there and not build them when we're there. So that's going to be a lot easier. All the equipment came in the last couple of days before NAB. And so it was very hard to integrate all of it. And so now we have more time to do that. Next question.
Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado up next. Can you cover solutions that might use virtual production like the volume at the prosumer cost level?
Yeah, we're definitely going to try to cover a lot of things that would relate to our audience, which would include that. So we'll see. I don't know how much is going to be there. That's really more of an Infocom kind of thing, which is happening the following week, I think. And I don't think we're set up to cover that right now. So that would probably be a little further out. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana with a practical production question. Any need to plan for the changing light, as it's usually cloudy in the morning and then bright sun in the afternoons? Add that to entering and leaving buildings.
Yeah, I think that the ND filters will be important. So, having something with, either being able to put them on, being able to switch to them if we're looking, using those cameras. And so having ND will be an important piece of that puzzle, of being able to swap it out relatively quickly as we go in and out of the bright areas. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
On the Friday thing I'm doing, I'm looking forward to this actually a little bit, because iPhones are actually pretty good at, if you position yourself correctly so that it's not completely split down the middle with bright sunlight and shadow, it usually does a pretty good job of exposure, even in pretty deep shadow. And then if you move out into bright sunlight, it racks for that. So my fingers are crossed that we'll get some decent pictures out of the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty, my experience has been pretty brutal at Cine Gear, the outdoor. So I do not look forward to outdoor shoots pretty much ever. As soon as you say, we're going outside, I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. It's just like, I have no idea what's going to happen now. I don't, and every time I've shot at Cine Gear, we've gotten reasonably good stuff. Everything's a little underlit inside of the hangar. And then everything is like stark, hard sun. By the way, if you're coming on site, it is LA. You are out there between noon or 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. You do want to have sunblock. Like, it's not going to be something that you don't want to do if we're shooting outside. It's a lot of sun. And I 2 Cine Gears in a row, I just got crispy crittered. Just covering. You don't think about it, and then suddenly you can kind of smell that I've gotten too much sun smell, and then you can't move your face for a week. Anyway, so next question.
I laugh only because I grew up in Phoenix, and
then it peels, and then you got another week of the peel. Just like big pieces of skin falling off your forehead. So, but 2 Cine Gears in a row, I did that, and now I'm better at it now. Next question.
Kyle Hammond, Chicago, Illinois. Will the panel on Saturday be able to be the conduit between the producers and the on-site crew?
There'll be 2 things. One is we do think that we're going to be able to get, we're going to see, but this is what we're always experimenting with. But we should be able to have, I'm going to be bringing down some iPads specifically for this, and we can still use phone. There is a display for Mukana that we don't usually use, which is the host display where you can rearrange stuff and so on and so forth. So we are going to try to have some of the questions be asked just right on site. Someone looking at a phone, they can just say, hey, I got a question from here. We got a question from here. Kind of want to experiment with that and see how well it works. Otherwise, the panelists will be the ones reading the questions to folks. We do have enough IFBs. Again, we had a little issue getting out of the live view that we're going to adjust so that we can use the IFB system. So what we should be able to do is use the electrosonic IFBs. We weren't really set up well, so we were kind of just handing people headphones and so on and so forth. We're not going to do that. So we're going to get a bunch of. We're going to at least have a cycling version of these where we can remove the ear tips, so that we can if we're going to hand something to somebody who's going to put it in their ear, it's either been alcohol swabbed or it's brand new, so that they can just put it in their ear and they can hear what we're talking. They can talk to the panelists, and so we're going to try to tie that. That's one of the big things that I want to try to get done is to make that the ability for the panelists to talk to the person on site. They'll definitely be able to talk to the people who are hosting, but I want to be able to get to a point where they can very easily talk to the individuals that are on site. So we're working on that. Next question.
Jack Ruppel's back from Breckenridge, Colorado. Will HDR or 5.1 be available? And how about Discord, YouTube, and or Mukana? What's happening there?
Yeah, so the Mukana will be definitely important. We're going to make it available on site. We want to see how that works with a tablet or with phones. So we have again another display that you aren't used to seeing that we can use on the phone that lets us see a list of the questions and actually rearrange them and accept them and reject them and stuff like that. So we're going to have that that we're going to use, and then we'll be doing about an hour, maybe 2 hours of the HDR 5.1. So we'll be doing that at the end of Saturday. So stay tuned for that. And we're near the top we're getting near the top of the hour, and we're getting near the end of the question. So if you have any last comments or questions for this, go ahead and throw them in. Otherwise, we'll end a little early today, which is fine. But if you have a couple lingering questions, go ahead and throw them in. Let's go to currently the last question.
It comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. If we won't have a booth, is there any vendor we might ask, or a location, the lobby of the theater or something like that we just designate as home base?
Yeah, we're working on that next. So we just got the approval to go in there. So now, I didn't want to line all that stuff up until I sorted out some of the other details. And so we are going to talk to folks about what we can do there. And there's a couple vendors that we know pretty well that are there. So I think that we may be able to do that. Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't know if they have a press room, but there is a VIP lounge there right in the middle of the back lot there on the inside. So I don't know who's allowed into that. I don't know if our press passes let us in.
Yeah, we're going to look to see if there's a press lounge that we can get into. I don't think the press and VIP lounges will be the same, but we'll see what's available for us. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Alex, you mentioned bringing iPads for question display. Wouldn't the iPad display not be easy to read in a very bright environment?
It just depends on the contrast of the questions, which ours have been proven to work pretty well. So I think that we're going to be okay in that area. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and there's a couple of sunshade companies. I don't know if they make them specifically with iPad, but for our IPS monitors in the field, a little pop-up that goes around the iPad is not out of the question. I think there's some second vendors that do that if you have to work in bright, bright sunlight.
Yeah, what was I going to say there? We've used the iPads in the outside in the past. It hasn't been that big of an issue. It's just a matter of having enough contrast in the images. Next question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago, will the first pre-production meeting be next Monday?
It will be Monday. And if you signed up for the forum, you'll get an announcement. We don't put it out everywhere, but if you signed up, if you're going to actually be working on the project, there'll be a meeting this Monday and this coming Monday and the following Monday.
Is it a separate Zoom meeting, or is it where we
separate?
Meet?
It's going to be a separate Zoom meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Mickey Makachor in the Philippines. What powering solution will be used in the sound bag to power the Scorpio, the Lectro transmitter receivers, the embedder, and so forth?
Still working that out. So I'm going to be talking to this guy named Mickey Makachor about what he recommends.
Does he know what he's talking about?
He sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and like he talks a good game. So so we need to figure that out. The Scorpio, right now a lot of those have been powered by what we did before, and is to power those. We have these little. I'm probably going to get a second one. Little small rigs that have 2 barrel outputs, as well as a D-tap, as well as USB, so that they can power a lot of different things, and they seem to last pretty long. And so I'm probably going to get a second one of those. The Scorpio, of course, we have batteries for. So I've got 4 of the, I think there's 700 series batteries that we can use for that. I don't think that it's going to run out in 4 hours or 5 hours. To be honest with you, I charge it relatively often. I've never had them run out. The Electros are on the Lectro receivers, I think, have been on battery in the past. We just got to make sure we have enough batteries. And the embedder has been powered by the small rig. So that's what we did in the past. But we may look at other options as we move forward. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I didn't know whether you're going to have a little tanker cart to move around with. I have some 33 amp sealed lead acid batteries in Pelican cases that I can bring that we can plug in 4-pin 12 volts supply to a BBS of some sort.
The one that I'm worried about right now is that we want to try to use the AJA embedder so that we can do 4K 60. So going up from what we did on the last one, we're going to try to do, we're probably not going to have the first half hour be the wrong channels because Alex and Kevin were messing with it. So the first part is that. And then the second part is really get the HDR working, as well as the surround. I am going to try to get 2 more wireless. One of the things I'm going to try to tune with Mickey is to use wireless for the surround, but there's some tuning that has to get done there to make sure that actually is going to work. So then you'd have take our 4 mic plugs and connect it to the Ambio mic, and then we need 2 more mics to do that. But there could be a lot of receivers, so it'd be good if you bring a battery, that'd be great. And we are going to look for a cart, I think, to move that along. I'm going to make sure that that's okay, but I think it was. We got away with it last time, but I think we want to try to get approval for it this time. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Any pre or post show dining in the area for a meetup?
Thursday night. So I'll be there Thursday. Definitely expect to have a get together on Thursday evening. I don't want I was thinking about doing it on Friday, but the problem with Friday is that, and we may still do another get together with the team that's there and so on and so forth. But the big get together will be Thursday night. Friday we may all get together, but I think that there may be pre-pro going on, and I don't want to we have to go to dinner when we're still trying to take the information that we got from Friday and get ready for Saturday. So I'm trying not to blend those together. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, there's usually an In-N-Out Burger mobile truck that's on the back lot there, and a little area to dine in, so we can gather.
That might be the Friday evening after we're done. Friday evening, absolutely. Yeah. And then we'll find somewhere to go. We'll see. There's an outside chance we might go I might invite people to go somewhere pretty cool. We'll see if that's an option. But I'm still working on that. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was looking at the floor plan of the place, and there is an area of they have dining tables set up somewhere. It's separate from the VIP area, so they must have some place you can sit down. I don't know if there's enough room there for the crew to gather or something like that for a break at lunch or something like that. But anyway, it's there.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. Would you ever think of connecting to traditional broadcast infrastructures to increase the potential reach of our content? And he specifically notes the Switch, LTN, and so forth.
100%. We're just not there yet. So this year is about us figuring out the model. So we experimented with NAB. We're going to experiment with some new stuff here. We're going to do more experimentation at SIGGRAPH. We're going to do more experimentation at IBC. There's another NAB in New York. So there's 4 or 5 events there's just the right timing so that we can like have time in between to think and talk and work on things. And then we'll flip the switch, and kind of say, well, this is what we're going to do. Like 2024 will be, we have decided this is how we do events, and we're just going to do them that way throughout that year, making very small revisions, but not trying to make big revisions of things. And then, each year we'll just make adjustments at the end of the year for the next year. But we'll still make adjustments in 2024, but 2023 is really spaghetti on the walls of like, let's figure this out, and then we'll start to settle in. But using the switch is something that we'd love to do, but we want to prove that we can build a really smooth show first. Next question.
Jack Ruppel, Breckenridge, Colorado. How do you use loopback in your production workflow?
I don't know how we would use it in this production workflow, but I think that in general, we use it obviously to get multiple audio and bind them together so we can get them into Zoom more easily. But I don't know how we're going to necessarily use them here. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. Is there a specific person like Michael Cioni that we might like to find at the show for a quick interview? There's
probably a few specific people. I'm going to try to find a couple people that we might even take out. One of the things I'd love to do is have Michael, or if someone like John Tatulis was on site or someone else was there, have them show us something that they think is cool. That's not necessarily a product that they cover, but just something that, hey, check this out, or maybe even we even walk with them a little bit and wander around. So we're going to kind of play around with that idea. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. And Roscoe asks, wheels were an issue for the tank when we did that, and there are some vendors with great carts for off-road filming. Might we get one?
Yeah, I'm going to look into that as far as getting some. Again, the tank isn't going to go. If we use a tank or something like it, it's going to be fairly small. It's going to have big wheels on it, and it's going to be something that we like a typical sound cart. With the big wheels on one side, you kind of rock and just move and set down. It's not going to be designed to go to every booth. It's going to be something that's following behind. If we end up using one, it'll be something that follows behind the wireless connections. And so we just have to figure out what's available there. Next question.
Ronnie Hofsway, Tromsø, Norway, says, will Bill be on site? Partially, yes.
Will you be on site, Bill?
Well, Alex and I talked about it on Thursday, and yes, I'm going to be driving down to Los Angeles. Is it down or up? I don't know which is higher elevation for Friday for some hanging out on set, but then I'm driving back to San Diego where I will come back and anchor the broadcast for the Saturday show. So I'll be a little bit there and a little bit not there.
I think it's kind of the perfect setup because Bill will have been there and he will have seen it and will have wandered around, and then he gets to go host it, which I think is a really great model. And I think that might be the way we do it in the future as well, where Bill might go in or I go in and we do it, and then we find a place that we can hub the event. That may not mean that Bill's going to test this by going home, but in the future it might be that we find a space somewhere that we can actually make that work. So,
and my wife, who's actually much better on camera, she's not going to do anything on camera, but she spent a lot of years in local television on air. So she and I are going together, and she's going to corral me and make sure I'm in the right place at the right time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. We'll be able to get a look at Cine Gear and the rest of this, and then come back and actually man the desk, so to speak.
So if you're interested, you have a couple more minutes. Literally, I'm going to grab onto those forms and put them in. So let us know. Don't fill it out if you're not coming or you're not going to work on it. And then we will have a meeting on Monday. You'll get an invitation, and we'll talk more about it on the next 2 Mondays and assign who's doing what, and try to make more of a take the ideas that we've talked about here and make a more defined plan. So stay tuned for that. We're really excited about it. So it should be a lot of fun. All right. Thanks so much to the producers asking all these great questions. We had a solid 50 questions that we managed in comments. It was fantastic. That's kind of nominal for us. It's good. And but really great questions for the first hour and the second hour. Thanks for your input there. I always say with the panelists, we can't do it without you, but it is so much. I got to tell you, as a panelist and as a host, when I get in the morning and we look at 6:30 or so and there's like 18 questions, we just know that it's going to be a great, it's just going to move, as far as, so it really makes a difference for the producer when the producers are asking a lot of questions. it just makes it, we just know it's going to be an easier show to work through because we're really just going through this stuff. Same thing when we have, like, for me, it's like when we have 12 to 16 people on the panel, and we've got, again, a solid, 18 questions at 7:00 in the morning, Pacific Standard. You just know it's going to be just a really hot show that's just going to kind of move through. So we really appreciate it when people are able to be here and ask those questions, because it does, we cannot do it. Like this show will not last if the producers aren't asking lots of great questions, which you did today. So thanks so much for that. And thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. Can't answer the questions. There's a bunch of times today that I was just like, oh, I would have never come up with that answer. Like that's, and so it was really, really great detailed answers. So thanks so much to the panelists, and thanks to the incredible team that develops, plans, manages, and executes this show 7 days a week. We just, again, this is the one show where I feel like we all do it together. It's not someone doing it for somebody else. We're all coming together and making that actually happen. If you're interested, there are, in the email that goes out, there's links to volunteer and be part of that production crew. You can find that in the emails that go out. And our next get together will be that Saturday. I don't know where it's going to be. I'll be at Cine Gear somewhere, but we will meet at 10 a.m. on Saturday and have our volunteer meeting for as many people as they're ready to do it. So we'd love to have you there. All right. We traveled 80,000 miles, 129,000 kilometers, and that is 635 million bananas for scale. Let's jump into After Hours.